scientific objectivity. No preconception.
I saw you raising one of your eyebrows there, Scott.
No, I think I'm going to yield.
Okay, Steve.
I'll raise both eyebrows on that.
Thank you.
Because I think it's a false dichotomy between so-called materialists, and I don't honestly know very many of them, and biblical literalists. And, you know, presenting those two sides lets you present intelligent design as some sort of compromise, which it's not. Science is what it is, and as Eric was pointing out, most people don't have a problem integrating those worldviews. And, you know, a material explanation through science could well be the hand of God. That could be an internal religious interpretation of what you're seeing in the universe. Science doesn't speak to that.
Fair from Overland Park is now on the line. Your question, please.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I would like to know the panel's opinion on Judge Jones's action. My opinion, I read the opinion. It's very devastating indictment of the intelligent design movement. I'd like to know the panel's opinion on how they think that set back the teaching of intelligent design in Kansas or maybe other schools across the country.
Excellent question. But before we get into that, let me just say quickly, for those who didn't watch the NOVA program, earlier tonight on KCPT, we did show you Judgment Day, that 2-hour NOVA that tracked the 2005 trial in Dover, Pennsylvania, which is the nation's first case to test the legal merits of intelligent design in the federal courts. The judge in the case, as the caller just pointed out, Judge Jones, concluded that intelligence design was not science, and that teaching it as science in public schools violated the First Amendment of the Constitution, which prohibits public officials from using their positions to impose or establish a particular religion. But back to the caller's question, though, John, how does that legal decision affect the debate over evolution in Kansas?
I think it's extraordinarily important to the debate. I think the decision is horribly wrong in a zillion different respects, and we don't have the time tonight to go into all those reasons.
We'd appreciate one, though.
Okay, well, Judge Jones improperly defined evolution, improperly defined intelligent design, improperly defined religion, and essentially embraced a materialistic paradigm that does not allow either intelligent design or criticisms of evolutionary theory. So essentially, his decision causes the state to establish a materialistic origin story, because it can't be criticized, it can't be questioned, and that's a real problem. In terms of its impact on education, it's going to have an enormous impact, and it's unfortunate, in my view, because it's going to have the wrong impact. I think his decision essentially is, on its face, unconstitutional.
Scott.
I think you'd have a very difficult time finding any scientist that would state that there isn't a large body of evidence in support of biological evolution or of the geologic record. I also believe that it would be very difficult for any scientist to honestly say they know where life began, they know where consciousness began, and they know how life in fact began. But that is the nature of the science itself. It's that quest for knowledge. To say that since we, at this point in time, do not know the answers to these questions, does not give us the freedom to say that it was created by a higher being. I mean, it doesn't say it. We don't have the freedom right now to say, I don't understand, therefore a higher entity must have spackled it in, created it. It was done by a higher entity. I don't think that would give the scientific community any justice, and it definitely wouldn't give the theologians any justice whatsoever.
It wouldn't motivate students.
It wouldn't motivate the students.
Steve.
Well, I've had some conversation with John Jones about his decision.
The judge in the case?
The judge in the case. And the decision was quite articulate, and the findings of fact, the definition of evolution is not something that he wrote, it's something that the expert witnesses in the case wrote, that he included in his decision. But Casey Luskin from the Discovery Institute is a lawyer who's extensively reviewed the decision with long, rambling diatribes. And I asked John one time what his opinion was of Casey's review of his case, whether it had any merit or standing in law, and he simply said no and went on.
We have Bob now in Kansas City who's on the line. Bob, your question, please.
Good evening. And
Is it all theory, one side or the other? And why are there two sides? There could be another side.
Steve?
No, they're not two sides. As we've talked about, I think most people are able to integrate these into one sort of cogent world view without a problem. The sides are kind of a false dichotomy, setting up of sides that occurs as people try to make a point or achieve political power. There's multiple sides. There's multiple belief systems. There is, however, only one science.
John?
In this science, this evolutionary biology is an historical science. So it seeks to explain the history of life, singular events, and there are always going to be two sides to an historical narrative. There is always going to be two sides. And the problem we have right now is, as Steve mentions, only one side is permitted, and that's a dogmatic, materialistic worldview, and it has an enormous impact on religion, ethics, and morals.
Great.
Well, at my level, of course, it doesn't get to that depth, you know.
But the caller did talk about, though, that there may be even more than two sides. I mean, you would be open when you were teaching to saying there could be a lot of explanation.
Yes, and I think the key is though, teachers are being forced by the standards to teach to this one side, and forces in this belief system because of the stories that you have to believe that they've made up to explain things, and so you have to. It forces a teacher to become like the preacher for the state-sanctioned religion, this belief system of these stories that explain what's unexplainable right now with science. As Scott said, it's just not, we can't know right now.
So you are a storyteller, Eric.
I just wanted to ask him for an example of a story that he thinks I might tell.
Oh, well, sure. Long, millions and millions of years ago, there was this primordial soup. And lightning struck it, and voila, we have amino acids.
Do you tell that story?
No.
That's the Uri Miller experiment. It's in all the science textbooks. He probably skips those pages.
Because he's concentrated more. Yes, all right.
And it's not in the book.
Well, I think this goes back to what Steve was saying about the origin of life being part of standards versus evolution, that the details of the origin of life are much more not understandable by scientific means at this moment. There are certain, obviously, experiments that you bring up that people did, somebody did in the 1950s that maybe gave people the idea at the time that, oh, we're going to explain the origin of life, but that hasn't happened.
John?
It's a critical, chemical evolution is critical to biological evolution. If chemical evolution cannot be explained materialistically, then what is the justification for using materialistic explanations for increases in diversity? If it takes an intelligence to create life, to produce the initial messages, which are about the size of a Tom Clancy novel, then why should we postulate no intelligence for improvements in the software?
And you respond to that how, Eric?
No, this is a little interesting because he says there's a story being told, and I say, tell me a story that I'm telling. He tells me this is a story I'm telling. I say I don't, and now he says, well, you can't tell the story?
No.
That's basically what he just said.
No, I think you can. I think that
if you can't tell the story, then there has to be a creator, and it's like science is a method of trying to discover things about the world. And just because we don't know the answer to a question in the moment doesn't mean that we can't use the methods of science to try to discover those things into the future. Exactly.
The question is if you're going to use the methods of science, are you going to suppress logical inferences that arise from the data because of the religious implications of those inferences? I don't think science should be doing that.